And Slamdance was the film festival that you founded. What was the origin story of that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, co-founded. Yeah, there were a bunch of us, but basically, I had done a film called Omaha the Movie, which technically counted as my thesis film at USC. I was in the grad program at USC at the time, but we shot it on 35 millimeter, edited on the Paramount lot. Robert Altman was kind of our mentor on the project. His grandson Dana Altman is still one of my producing partners, and it didn't get into Sundance. That's kind of the short version. But it was around that time that we had met a bunch of other indie filmmakers. So Dana kind of had the idea of let's do something to team up with other filmmakers around the rest of the country, because he was in Omaha, which is where I'm originally from, but I was living in LA. But we didn't quite know how to manifest that until we all got rejected from Sundance. And we had heard of a couple individual filmmakers the year before, in January 1994, who didn't get into Sundance and did their own renegade screenings in Park City. So it was Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the South Park guys. Before South Park, they had done Cannibal the Musical. They had done their own little renegade screening when they didn't get into Sundance. James Marandino had a film called The Upstairs Neighbor. Same thing. He did a little renegade screening in Park City. And so we'd heard about these guys through various means. And then also there's a group of New York filmmakers, Matt Harrison and his friends at Film Crash. They had shown some shorts in Park City over the years. So we'd heard about these various experiments in sort of renegade screenings in Park City. And then it was actually Shane Coon who had directed a film called Redneck. That was his AFI thesis film, coincidentally also shot in Nebraska. He's the one who kind of married these ideas together and said, hey, why don't we get a group of us together and do a renegade festival in Park City? And so then we teamed up with another filmmaker, John Fitzgerald, and then our friend Paul Rackman said, hey, but I've got a short, so why don't we do shorts too? So we wound up getting like a dozen features and a dozen shorts. There's a guy named Peter Baxter who produced one of the features. He got very involved with it, and he's the one who's really most still involved to this day. As well as Paul as well, and me to a much lesser degree. Anyway, the point is there was a whole group of us, and we combined our resources together. We all stayed in a condo in Salt Lake City. At first, our screenings were in Salt Lake City, and then there were some filmmakers that we had, Frank Hudak and Lisa Raven, who said, no, let's go to Park City itself, because we looked at the map and Salt Lake City was an inch away from Park City, and we thought, oh, everyone will just go there. But it turns out it's like an hour in the snow. And so Lisa and Frank and I drove up to Park City. We found a venue, literally a conference room at the Prospector Hotel, 30 feet down the hall from Sundance's main venue at the time. And so we started doing our screenings there and set our screenings for like 15 minutes after their screenings. So we would get they would always have this sold out line. So we just got this sold out audience to just like come into our room. But this was, part of it was just to contextualize it. Like, this is January 95, and this was a time of kind of the Hollywoodization of independent film. Miramax become part of Disney. Fine Line had become part of Warner Brothers. Fox was getting ready to launch Fox Searchlight. It was all the studios were starting to, see dollar signs in indie film. This was when Harvey Weinstein was going to Sundance and sponsoring Sundance and doing all kinds of horrible things there. That was that era. And so Sundance was kind of along for the ride. They were going, woohoo, we're going Hollywood. So they started to show more films by second-time directors and films with bigger budgets and bigger stars and films that already had distribution or were, silently already had distribution. And so they kind of left behind this niche of the first-time indie filmmakers working on low budget with no distribution. All of us had been influenced very much by and inspired by kind of that first generation of Sundance filmmakers, Steven Soderbergh in '89, and Robert Rodriguez and Richard Linklater and Allison Anders, that crew. And at the time, there were a lot fewer film festivals. This was South by was just starting films at that point, but they hadn't really taken off in terms of the film world. Tribeca hadn't started yet. And most regional festivals, and there were a lot of good ones then, and international festivals, they would just take that Sundance catalog and just use it as their template for what they would program. So those Sundance filmmakers would play for a year at every festival. And so this was by starting Slamdance, we kind of broke that hegemony. We broke that mold. And so our film started to get into other festivals, and it was around that same time again that South by was starting. The Hamptons Film Festival started around that time. New York Underground, Chicago Underground, L.A. What was then called the LA Independent Film Festival. We all kind of started around that year because I think we all recognized that there was this Sundance hegemony that and there was a much greater demand too. There were a lot more indie films being made, and Sundance also didn't show that many films at that time. They really only had one main section. So then Sundance responded a year later and added a whole other section, and then these other films festivals really kind of took off as well.
How did Sundance take you guys starting a rival film festival right down the street?
They weren't happy. Redford at one point called us parasites, which he was right, of course. But we always said, we were like the beautiful moss on the oak tree that just made the whole forest look better, And it was a symbiotic relationship, which I think eventually they figured out. But that was the best street cred we could ever get. I mean, honestly, the press was turning on Sundance at around that time too, for all these excesses, and so we were kind of the cool, hip, underground punk kids, in the corner, and so we kind of became the press darlings, right from the get-go. Which drove Sundance even crazier, So they literally tried to run us out of town for 30 years, on and off. um, but we eventually figured out that a lot of our first, because our Slamdance was, to this day, is still focused on first-time directors with limited budgets and no distribution. And a lot of our filmmakers, then their second films, or if their short was at Sundance, then their feature would go to, if their short was at Slamdance, their feature would go to Sundance. Their second films would go there. And those were the filmmakers that would do very well at Sundance because they'd been to Park City. They knew how to hire a publicist. They knew how to stay in a condo. They knew what the weather was like there. And so a lot of the great filmmakers that we've had wound up becoming great Sundance filmmakers too.
They're able to do the networking in Sundance while actually being there for a reason, I guess, if you want to call it that. Like they're not just showing up there as tourists. So it's a definitely, well, not to overuse the term, but definitely a subversive way to get yourself, quote unquote, into Sundance without being in Sundance. I mean, I know that it's evolved over the last 30 years or so. How's the Slamdance Film Festival evolved, or has it stayed kind of true to its roots over the past 3 decades?
In most regards, it stayed about the same. We never really got too big by design. We tried to stay small. So our main focus is still on first-time directors and limited budgets and no distribution. That's still kind of our main core, sections. The big change geographically is that we kind of saw the writing on the wall that Sundance was going to move. And sure enough, next year will be Sundance's last year in Park City. Then they're moving to Boulder. We didn't really know where they were moving to, but we moved to LA this past year. And for much the same reason that Sundance moved, which is that it was just getting too expensive in Park City. Filmmakers couldn't stay there. They couldn't get there. Park City itself didn't particularly want either festival because it was the height of ski season. So all these film people who don't ski were taking all the condo spots of the ski resort. So they hated us. And it was just becoming a big mess there. Traffic was a mess and everything. And at the same time, I mean, we were always kind of based in LA. Most of us live here and our office is here. And we had been doing events in LA on and off for 30 years anyway, like not during the festival time, but during other parts of the year, various screenings and other events and parties and things. So we kind of know LA. So, but also LA had a vacuum. The LA Film Festival shut down a few years ago. AbFest shut down a few years ago. So this seemed, COVID was over. So this seemed like the time to come to LA and do our thing. And so it went very well. We were in West Hollywood last year. I'm not sure exactly where we'll be next year, but I think still in LA. When Sundance moves to Boulder, I don't know. Maybe we'll go there too. Maybe we'll stay in LA. We really take it as a year by year decision. So, which I think has been good for us to sort of, be a little bit nimble and flexible that way.
And like there were always some unique things about Slamdance that I would read about, and I don't know if these are legend or myth, but like the idea of like the hot tub summits and things like that.
We did that for well over 10 years, which was a panel discussion in a hot tub. And yeah, usually I was the one that was leading that. But yeah, no, we would do fun things like that because again, first of all of us who run Slamdance one way or another are alumni of the festival. We're all filmmakers. It's our motto is by filmmakers for filmmakers, and so we would go to other film festivals around the world and see, okay, well, what works best at film festivals, and well, what are the things we want to emulate and start um, at Slamdance. And so really what's come of that is there's a Slamdance vibe that's very unique and different than I think most other festivals, which is very supportive and non-judgmental and non-competitive. I mean, we have awards, but it's everyone are very supportive and very collaborative. A lot of filmmakers have met collaboration partners. Chris Nolan met Wally Pfister, anyway, Wally, his DP at Slamdance, and then they went on to make 10 films together. I've met producers and DPs on my last 3 films at Slamdance. People, directors meet actors there all the time. Directors will collaborate with other directors and do projects together. And we kind of realized like that vibe, that Slamdance vibe, which is a little bit indefinable, can exist no matter where we are physically. And we had exactly that same vibe in LA last year. And also part of that is that Slamdance alumni, like as soon as you show a film at Slamdance, the next year you're invited to become a programmer. So there's a constant churn in programming. And so, the Russo brothers were programmers for 3 years. Chris Nolan's wife, Emma Thomas, who's his producing partner, Dame Emma now, sorry, she was a programmer for 2 or 3 years. Ryan Johnson was a programmer for a year. So so this is a tradition that goes back really since our founding, and because of that, the ties among Slamdance filmmakers tend to be a little stronger than just okay, you go to a film festival for a week, you make a bunch of friends, and then you leave. No, we make a point of keeping that community together even beyond the life of the festival itself.
Is this kind of where you saw yourself being when you first got into this industry?
No, in fact, my wife warned me, and my filmmaker partner at the time warned me, like, do you want to be a filmmaker or do you want to be a film festival programmer? And I was like, I want to be a filmmaker. And then 7 years later, I was still heavily involved with Slamdance. And then, and then I really had to make a conscious effort to kind of take a step back from it. Because again, by then we had enough other alumni that were keeping the organization alive and keeping it true to its original roots.